Dennis Kelly, thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview.
You're welcome.
So the settings are notably repetitive. You've got the street, the field, the wood. That's how the first three acts start. And it seems that the characters' behavior becomes less and less civilized the further they are from society, with each setting perhaps becoming more and more remote. And then on top of that, there's this sort of, as well as the cyclical nature of the repeated settings, there's Leah's question: do you think we're doomed to behave like people before us did? So I just wonder if you could start by explaining your thinking behind the choice of settings in the play.
I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I agree that the further away from civilization they get, them more, because the field obviously is a place where they are. That's Leah and Phil, and it seems to me that that's the most. I mean, civilized is a weird sort of word to use, but that's where they are. They're at their most philosophical, but they're also kind of the most calm and the most decent, I think. I think a woods feels like. I mean, I think really the settings felt like places that I would be when I was a kid. I mean, when I wrote the play, I wanted no adults in it because I felt that the world of being a young teenager, and I thought they were probably about 12 or 13 when I wrote it, but the world of being a young teenager, adults didn't really count. If you had a problem when I was a kid anyway, you couldn't really take it to an adult, but they wouldn't understand it. They'd only make it worse. It felt a very dangerous, scary place to be, actually. And those places are places that are sort of oddly devoid of grown-ups. Like, grown-ups don't hang around in a field, and they kind of, grown-ups go for a walk in a wood, but they don't hang around in a wood. Obviously there are grown-ups in a street, but again, grown-ups don't just hang in a street. They so weirdly those felt like places that weren't grown-ups places, and I think there is I mean, there's the repetition. There's a functional thing in the repetition, which is that you don't want to you need to set things somewhere, and you need to you don't want to have too many sets. You want to kind of you don't want to have 16 different places where they are. But there is a repetition going on because it's the same type of scene happens in the same type of setting. So that those scenes do sort of speak to those, and I kind of wanted that. I wanted it to feel like when you came back, you were in the same place. You hadn't, but it was slightly different, because that's sort of what happens every time. You're in exactly the same place, but it's slightly different. And what's happened is it's got worse. The stakes have been raised, and they've really been raised because of something that happened in the previous time we were here. So that answers some of your question, but maybe not all of it.
No, that's good. I think, yeah. So this idea of the repetitive settings, but as you say, it gets more and more sort of sinister and pretty terrible as it goes on and on.
Yeah.
So there's a sort of growing tension, but obviously, yeah, I guess the practicalities of the setting as well is something that with my English teacher I don't really think about, but I guess, yeah, that's the sort of the staging. It's got to be practical. It's interesting what you say about them being children, because I like the opening note says the names and genders of characters are suggestions only and can be changed.
Yeah.
But what I get from that is obviously what cannot be changed is that these are children. And as you say, they're sort of 12, 13, whatever. And that to me is a strong reminder of Lord of the Flies, with that kind of, children and savage behavior without the influence of adults. But given the play's title, are we supposed to assume that there's a sense that their behavior is innate and it is part of their DNA rather than something they've learned? Is that one of the influences?
No, I think children? No, I think that's the question. I don't know whether that's what the play says, but I think that's probably the question. That's probably what is, the kind of question is, are we bonobos or are we chimps? And the answer, I don't know the answers to that, but I think we're obviously neither. We're Homo sapien. We're a different, but that in that kind of really crude way of looking at evolution, we sort of we have considered ourselves, and the ancestors of chimps for a long time, but actually the descendants of chimps for a long time, which is not true at all. But I mean, we've considered ourselves that. But the idea being, if had we considered ourselves the descendants of bonobos, we might have a different view. I mean, I think the truth is we're probably a bit of chimp and a bit of bonobo. We're probably a bit of both. I think when Leah asks, "Are we doomed to repeat?" I mean, I think Leah is proof that we're not.
Yeah.
Because she doesn't repeat. She breaks the cycle. At the end of the play, she goes, and I find that very hopeful. I find that very hopeful that Leah is this kind of moral beating heart of the play, but in the end, she's sort of like she knows that they've gone somewhere terrible, and so she can't be part of that. I think the Lord of the Flies comparison is definitely there. I think Lord of the Flies. I've got a complicated relationship with Lord of the Flies. On one hand, I sort of love it and I think it's amazing, but I also think it sort of isn't really true.
Yeah.
When people crash on there's in the wilderness, what they tend to do is help each other. They don't tend to revert to savagery. And I wrote it for children, but I didn't write this in any way differently from how I would write a play for grown-ups, to be honest. You know what I mean? I write my plays for grown-ups. This kind of stuff could happen just as easily as because my view is that children aren't any different from we sort of treat children like they're a different species. Children are just a bit smaller, that's all. They're exactly the same. My daughter's 3, but I think she's as smart as I am. I know more stuff than her. I can say more things. I can do more things with language because I've learned that stuff. But I'm not any smarter than her. You know what I mean? She's as smart as she's probably smarter. But and I think that about children, we tend to think of them as this slightly different species, but in general. But I'm not sure that's true. And so when I wrote DNA, I didn't pull any punches. I wrote in the same way that I would write for grown-ups, which means I'm going to go to some dark places. Yeah. But it's also not just dark, you know what I mean? Like, actually, it's sort of about cooperation. They're kind of cooperating, these people, and they're trying to. I always think they're trying to fix a problem. They're just doing it with the wrong from the wrong place. Phil, it's interesting. People kind of have I've seen so many productions where Phil was this arch manipulator and where he's this really dark character. I've never ever seen him like that. I think I've always thought he's just this kid who he wants to stay out of it. He doesn't say anything. He just eats his sweets. He knows that this is dangerous. He's got a good sense of what's going on. In fact, he's got his head screwed on, Phil. He knows that school at this time is dangerous. So he just shuts up. He don't talk to anyone. He knows that if he gets through this, the rest of his life is gravy. You know what I mean? It's all going to be fine. And his biggest mistake, I always think, is putting the Coke can down. Like, if he didn't he puts it down and then he starts talking. If he didn't do that, if he didn't get involved, it would be. But actually, he's trying to solve a problem. He's trying to. Something terrible has happened. I mean, it's easy for us to go, oh, they should all go and report it to a teacher. They should all go and do this. But given what I said about that's not really what my experience of being a kid was, they don't do that, and he looks at it and he goes, well, something terrible has just happened, but should all these people go to prison, all their families, so he tries to solve that problem. He makes a mistake, but he gets further and further dragged into it. And by the end of it, he has become something quite dark, I think. But I don't think he wanted to be that.
Yeah, that's interesting because there's a quote that I gave in an interview, which really I thought was very interesting, and it echoes what you just said. I think it was with Maggie Inchley. You said the play explores, quote, how much do the rights of the individual matter compared to the group, end quote. So this idea of Phil just trying to do the right thing to help his friendship group, or the others. What does the play tell us about being in a group in terms of this idea of the collective versus the individual?
Well, I think it's the thing about groups is it's sort of like, there's that beautiful word, isn't it? A murmuration of starlings, which is like where you see lots of starlings sort of in the sky and they swirl around. It happens every, a couple, very rarely in the year, but you can look up and you can see these incredible patterns that are created, and they're created because one bird goes this way and all the other birds go with it, and and there's no control. They all sort of go that way, and I think group dynamics can be like that. They can, very quickly, a group can suddenly seem like a laugh can suddenly be terrible, and it happens. It's sort of what was never meant to be brutal becomes awful, and so I think that the thing about groups behave differently from individuals. They as an individual, I don't think there's many people in that on that stage in that play, probably with the exception of Kathy, really, who finds out that she's probably a psychopath, and that's a sort of career calling for her. But with the exception of Kathy, I don't think there's anyone that really wanted any of that stuff to happen.
So one of the other angles the exam boards often take is this idea of leadership in the play. And this is something I found really interesting, because initially it appears that John Tate is the boss. He's sort of this sort of bully who threatens, we're not saying the word dead, I'll bite your face if you say it. And you think, okay, this guy's the leader. But then Richard comes in and that doesn't work with him, there's threats of violence. And it soon sort of becomes clear that Phil, as you say, reluctantly puts down the Coke can and kind of comes up with the plan and then becomes the leader. But by the end, Kathy is, some kind of leader. So what is the play saying about leadership as a whole?
Well, I should probably have said this at the beginning, by the way. If what I'm going to say about the play and what is going to pass you your exam is not necessarily the best thing. I think Alan Bennett said as much to you, didn't he? That actually listen to the people who because there's no good saying, well, Dennis Kelly said that it wasn't that, you're wrong, because you might fail your exam. Although I think you probably can quote the play, right? So that's fair enough. But I'm not sure what the play's saying about leadership. I'm not sure. I mean, I think what it's saying is that what is sort of dynamics change within a group, and the group is not necessarily. It's really tempting to think John Tate, he's the boss, he's controlling all this, he's on top of it all, he's got everyone. But actually, we find out the next when we come back to the second act, we find out he's not on top of anything. He's just as sort of like, he's a kid, he's not this kind of super smart gang leader type person. He's a kid who kind of happened to find himself in this situation and probably kind of thought, I don't know why these people are listening to me, but I'm going to make hay, while it's happening. And then suddenly this thing happens and it freaks him out as much as it freaks out the next person. And then, then it sort of seems to be Phil that takes the mantle of leadership, but really only because no one else is doing it and he's the one who's talking and making a plan, And then, Richard steps in, I think, or Kathy steps in, and, it's sort of, I think it's, I don't think, it's really tempting to look at our leaders and think that they know what they're doing. I think I always kind of, when I grew up, as I was growing up, I might have complained about our leaders, but I always kind of thought, yeah, but somewhere they know what they're doing. I don't really think that now. I think, and I don't mean that as an accusation. I think it's really easy to kind of go, oh, politicians are all in it for themselves. I don't think they know what they're doing any more than I do, or any more than you do, or we're all just idiots. We're all just idiots bumbling around. unfortunately, we give some of these idiots lots of power, and they're not really able to say, "Oh, I'm an idiot. I don't know what I'm doing," you know. And so we see our, you know, we've had a terrible spate of leaders, you know, and they've done some really, you know, clumsy things that have cost a lot of people their lives, you know, around the world. Like we've had some really awful, you know, if I'm honest, mostly male leaders that have really been just really bad for the human race. I think if the play's saying anything about leadership, it's probably saying that, you know, trusting our leaders too much, or handing responsibility to our leaders just kind of doesn't work. There's no grown-ups really. We're all just idiots.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay, so some fairly quick fire, just questions to finish, if that's all right. These are the questions that, some of the questions that were sent in that people are just like, I need to know this. So they're some of them are quite
I
fun.
may not have an answer.
Yeah, that's right. So why is Phil constantly eating?
I get asked that a lot, and
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure. When I wrote the first draft of the play, Phil and Leah were in conversation. When I say the first draft, it wasn't the first draft. It was the first 6 pages. And so I wrote Leah and Phil in conversation, and it just didn't work. It was really boring, you know. And then I decided that it felt to me that it would be good that Phil didn't say anything because he had nothing to say.
Yeah.
And so then what happened then was Leah filled the void, and it suddenly became interesting to me, you know. I think Phil doesn't speak because, like I say, I think he's kind of waiting it out. I think he's kind of thinking, I'm just going to wait this out, you know. I think he eats because eating's really nice, you know. Like I think it's, you know, it can be this can be, Phil can be overcomplicated, and normally is. And this is what Leah, like what Phil's essentially a blank canvas for Leah, and she projects on him. She says all this stuff about him. We don't know if any of the stuff that she's saying is true, but actually they both get something from that relationship. Leah gets this, you know, she gets to kind of create a Phil in her mind, and Phil doesn't say to her, "You've got me totally wrong." None of that is true. You know, he's you know, but he's getting something from Leah as well. They're sitting there together. He's getting sort of a kind of companionship without all of the crazy danger that's going on in the woods or in the street. You know, they get to go to the field and just be there, and you know, we may judge it and go, well, what the hell's going on? But actually, that is a form of companionship that is working quite well, you know. And I think this it's just, he's always eating because, you know, they're uncomplicated, aren't they, sweets? You know what I mean? You eat a pack of Starburst, it's just uncomplicated. You know what I mean? It's just like it's, you like it, it tastes nice, and it's like very, very uncomplicated. And I think, to me, it always seems like it's as simple as that, really.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's good. Now, are we supposed to think that Phil and Leah were a romantic couple in the opening part of the play? Or is that open?
I think some people think that. I think you can think that. I think it's sort of, I don't think it matters, really. I didn't necessarily think that they were in a romantic relationship, although it sometimes feels like that. I think intense friendships can feel romantic. I think intense relationships can border on that, you know. I don't really have an answer to that. I also think it's sort of up to the individuals playing it and the director, you know. I've never particularly seen it that way, but that might not be right.
Yeah. Okay. Very important question now. Jerry, the pet in the Tupperware container that Leah kills and shows to Phil. I'm thinking a hamster, but what were you thinking?
Clearly a hamster. It's clearly a hamster.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think he's a hamster.
That'll be in every exam answer now. I've
always thought it was a hamster,
yeah.
and I just like the fact that she's called a hamster Jerry.
Yeah.
It's sort of it's sort of there's something nice there. But
It's good because again, it shows the progression. Because Leah seems to be the most sort of philosophical, deep thinking character, and then she, it's always like, randomly then says, "Oh, and I killed my pet."
yeah.
Look. And you sort of think, "Oh, this is not, this is another complex character. She's not just a one dimensional kind of. She's the deep
No,
thinker."
I think it's having a real effect on Leah. I think all of this stuff is having a real effect on her, and she goes home on her own, and she suddenly finds herself experimenting with violence in a way that just isn't her. I think it doesn't feel, that's why she has to come in. She doesn't kill her hamster and then go, great, I must find a cat and kill that. It's not, it doesn't suit her. It doesn't sit well with her. And she'll probably be haunted by it for the rest of her life, what she just did, I think it's funny, things like that. You could take that as a sign that she's sort of psychotic or dangerous or any of those things. But actually, I sort of think it's a sign that she isn't, because she doesn't do what a psychopath would do, which is to carry on doing it. She doesn't seem to be enjoying it,
Just a technical question. At times in the play, there are pauses, and then at times there are what you describe as beats. Are they supposed to be audible sound effects, or does it just mean some time passes, or is that open?
Yeah, a beat is just so a pause is like it's probably just different lengths of pause. But I think a beat isn't so much a beat isn't so much a pause. It's more a change. Like it's a sort of a I always see it as a kind of it's like a pause before a line, but it's sort of like a beat is like I often think it indicates a thought in there somewhere, but just a kind of a change. Whereas a pause is actually more temporal. A pause is like, I always feel a pause is more about time, whereas a beat is it's a space, but there's probably something happening in that space.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Well, I think that's all of my questions. So thank you so much for doing this.
No, you're welcome. You're welcome. Yeah, yeah.